Just wanted to say welcome to our first virtual barrel tasting for Foursight Wines. I am Christy and this is Joe. We are owners and Joe is our winemaker. And we just wanted to say that we have a lot of really familiar faces on today. I see people are still joining. I'm going to spend a couple minutes just talking about the lay of the land for today, giving you an outline of what we're going to go over. There's a lot of new faces as well. So if you are a Foursight veteran, we're going to spend a few minutes talking about our history, what we do, what kind of wines we produce. So you can tune out, have a sip of wine, have something to eat. If you're new to Foursight as we go along, just remember that this is a webinar, not a meeting. So use the Q&A or the chat buttons, and so we can answer your questions. I am FSW chat, so I will be answering your chats through that. So just reply to all panelists and we will make sure that we get questions answered. If we delve perhaps into wild malolactic fermentation or something that might need a little extra Q&A. So today we'll be tasting 3 samples, and wine number 1, we've got our little 2019 Charles Vineyard Pinot Noir. So it's the one with the blue circle on the label. So that's the first wine we'll be tasting today. Hi, Sonia. Wine number 2 will be the Clone 05. We've got a gold circle on the label. So that is a wine number 2. Wine number 3, orange label, Parabol. And yes, Bob, new black corks. Beer opener, or the little on your corkscrew. So we'll be tasting in that order. As you can see today, we are in the cellar in our winery in Anderson Valley. So we have all 3 barrels that are the same wines as your mini bottles here. And so Joe, our winemaker, will be going through and thieving little samples as we taste through. That is the technical term for taking a little sample from a barrel. And so we'll be tasting in that 1, 2, 3 order today. So normally we'd be hosting the Anderson Valley Barrel Tasting Weekend right now. And we'd be welcoming people into the cellar today and tomorrow. Wineries all throughout Anderson Valley will have food and music. Obviously, we can't do that. So we were hoping to bring a little piece of that event to your homes today. It is our first virtual barrel tasting, so feedback is always welcome. So barrel tasting, it's kind of a special time. You get to come into the cellar, taste with the winemaker, and just get a sense of new wines that haven't been bottled yet. So it's an opportunity to taste something you don't normally get to taste in a winery tasting room. And so these wines are wines that we're tasting today. They are final blends. They'll be bottled in 2 weeks, so very soon. And these wines, they're fresh, they're new, so we'll take some time today to talk about how they will change in between, when some of you buy futures right now and when they get released to you in the spring, which is part of barrel tasting. Often people offer futures at a discounted price. So we'll talk a little bit about the, just the evolution of the wines as we will go through the next, almost year. So we will now jump into a little bit about Foursight Wines, a little presentation about us, and then we're going to taste some wine. So hang tight with us. I'm going to share our screen now. Okay. So here is Anderson Valley. For those of you who haven't visited us, Anderson Valley is a tiny little slice of an appellation that goes through the coastal mountain range of Mendocino. And it is only about 15 miles long and a few miles wide. And as the crow flies, it's 10 to 15 miles from the Pacific Ocean. It takes a little longer to get there by car. If you've ever been here, you'll understand. So Mendocino is our greater appellation. We're north of Sonoma, about a 2-hour drive from the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. So we're a very cool wine growing region. We specialize in Pinot Noir and white wine varieties only. And so this is looking west toward the coast. These pictures were taken from a small plain above Anderson Valley, and it was a little bit hazy that day, but it gives you an idea of the vastness of Anderson Valley and what surrounds us. So this is the coastal mountain range looking west towards the Pacific Ocean. This is our vineyard. So here at Foursight, we farm only estate fruits. Our tasting room, see your little cursor at the left-hand side, is on the left-hand side of the picture. And then we have 2 blocks of grapes. So we have Pinot Noir, Sauvignon Blanc, and Semillon planted here in 2001. The yellow lines are the different soil types of the vineyard. We actually went through this with our wine club last month, so you're familiar with this, but we have 3 different soil types here, including the river you see weaving through the top. That is Anderson Creek, which is a major tributary to the Navarro River. And this river used to go right through our Charles Vineyard. So that is another soil type that we have is Old Riverbed. So it's 15 acres altogether planted here. This is our family. So we're a family operation. Billy, Nancy, Charles on the left, my parents, and there are farmers. They produce all the fruit that we use on the vineyard. The little nugget in between is Evan, who's our son. He's the 5th generation of our family here. And then of course, Joe and I on the right, looking dolled up for photo time, not COVID hair, full makeup, which is rare nowadays. So Foursight means 4 generations looking to the future. So we're 4 generations on the property here in Anderson Valley. And the last slide, these are the vineyard blocks that produce our Pinot. So we actually have 4 different clones at the bottom side of the vineyard underneath the label Pinot Noir. On the left, you see Pomardo 5, and then there's 3 Dijon clones. So clones are just types of Pinot Noir. They're like our spice rack, I always say. So they ripen a little differently, they taste a little different. And so we blend them or don't blend them to make the final wines, like the 3 that you're tasting today. So for instance, our Clono 5, the second wine you'll taste, is just from the Pommard block. And then the others are some combination of those different blocks. And then of course you see our tasting room, and there are some sheep and we do hay. So we've got a little family farm going. Here are our wines. So we do Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Noir, and Semillon from our estate. Okay. All right, you're back with us. So let's drink some wine, everybody.
So if you haven't poured the first wine yet, now's the time to do it. The Charles Vineyard Pinot Noir is what we're going to sample here first. This is our 2019 Charles Pinot. This is the one we produce the most of. This is our flagship blend. I'm going to pull a little sample to taste with you guys. Christy, would you like some as well?
I would love some.
So this is called the Wine Thief, and it's stealing wine out of the bunghole. So the 2019 Charles Vineyard Pinot Noir, we ended up finalizing the blend here with 43% new French oak, 28% was second year, and the remainder was third year and older. This blend ended up with approximately 30% whole cluster inclusion. So we're putting some whole clusters down into the bottom of the fermenters and integrating those into the fermentations. This is the one that we also consider the most ageable. It's picked earlier than the next 2 that we're gonna try. We sort of make 2 wines out of this sort of pick date. We make the Charles Pinot, which we're tasting here. We also make a 0 new oak Pinot, where I make this exact same wine that's just all in older barrels. There's no new oak influence to it at all. This is actually the 14th vintage for this blend. Our very first vintage was in 2006 for this particular bottling. It is probably one of our more versatile for food pairings. It's not as ripe as the next 2 we're gonna try. It's not quite as lean as the 0. A little bit of new oak, a little bit of older oak. It's very good with wild game meats, salmon, which we've been eating and getting locally. It's been a delicious wine thus far.
So that is the blue circle. Hopefully you're tasting with us.
So scheduled release date for this for us won't be for 20 months after bottling. So this wine will be released from us later than the next two that we're going to try. The Clone and the Parabol, all of our releases are timed around May, around Pinot Festival. Hopefully we get to have one of those again, but we'll still be releasing our wines at that time. We let the Charles and the Zero do 20 months typically in bottle before release. So because Charles is a little more ageable, we've decided to hold it on our end in the warehouse for an additional year to let it just kind of flesh out a little bit more. 2017 would probably be the most similar vintage to these 2019s here for any of our customers that have been familiar with us on those vintages. 2017 has been quite similar to the 2019s here. I just wanted to touch a little bit about the harvest and just the overall winemaking season for the vintage of 2019. It was a relatively wet winter. Our average rainfall here is about 40 inches. We ended up with a little north of 70 in this particular vintage. Pretty cool average growing season. We did have some heat spikes in August. They did not sacrifice the fruit. We were able to mitigate through that. We don't work our vineyard at all from the afternoon sun side, so we don't have as much susceptibility to sunburn on those warm days. It's not the total warmth we have, it's how many warm days did we have before it. Are the vines accustomed to that heat? So 2017, as I mentioned, would be the most similar vintage. Harvest was normal for us in the second week of September with this vintage. Everything we do for Pinot Noir is wild yeast, wild malolactic, and unfined and unfiltered. These wines that you guys are tasting were pulled out of these barrels, and the only thing that will happen to them is they will go through the bottling line. There's no more additions of sulfur. There's no blending, there's no filtration, there's no fining agents. None of that is going to be done to these wines. They're final, total, and complete wines at this point. They just got to get to their happy home under cork. We do use partial whole cluster on all of our Pinots, and these three Pinots do vary in that percentage, so we will mention that as we go along. Whole cluster is something we like to do to add different flavor components to the wine, to change the way the wine ferments. It's a great way to just add more richness, more body, more mouthfeel to the wine as well.
What is a whole cluster for those that don't know what a whole cluster is?
So when we say partial whole cluster, what we mean is the pictures of the clusters that you see as they're coming in from the vineyard after the sorting table. They're not put through the machine that separates them, the berries from the stems. We're putting the entire cluster, whole berry, whole stem, and everything into the fermenter after the sorting table.
So why wouldn't everybody do this?
You can't pump whole clusters. You basically have to be set up for gravity or want to do lots and lots and lots of shoveling to do whole clusters. So
moving it all by hand.
We have our gravity set up between the barrels back here. You can see the magic forklift with the bin rotator. So everything here has been scaled so that the forklift can lift it in the air and spin things around as needed. All of our wines are also vegan and vegetarian friendly, and everything we do has got ingredients listed as well. So if any of you guys are wondering what's on the wine and you ever wonder that with food, just turn the label around and you can read it and it'll tell you what's in it, at least for us. So I think we're going to move on now to our second Pinot.
Not quite yet.
Sorry.
I need you for another minute.
Let me jump ahead.
Winemaker likes to taste through, talk quickly. So this wine, the Charles, is actually my pick for cellaring. I like to put this away as long as I can. I know not everybody has that opportunity, possibility, cellar space to do, but I think it really starts to shine 7 to 8 years after the vintage. You can lay it down a decade plus. We have, I believe, proven this to some of the attendees here who attend our library wine tasting, pre-COVID. And we get to taste through old things from the cellar. And the Charles is always a favorite. So that would be my recommendation, is if you have the opportunity, give this one a little bit of time. And I want to talk briefly about just kind of what we get in this wine and how we think it might change. As you can tell, if you're new to our wines, we do pick a little earlier than a lot. I mean, this one's, I believe, 13.6% alcohol. And so, good acidity. It's got that like mouth-watering fruit. It's got a little bit of oak, but that like really bright cherry berry. Sometimes you can even get like cranberry or pomegranate in our wines because the earlier pick date. So that will remain. I mean, those, this is final wine, as we talked about. It's bottled in a couple weeks, right? But how would you see this progressing as, it ages and as we get closer to when people will get this wine?
So the way wine ages is by absorbing oxygen, or that's the main way that the tannins and the acids soften and the flavors change over time. So as a little bit of oxygen seeps through that cork, as wine and alcohol are going out the other way, as you're cellaring your wines, the flavor profile changes. The fruit won't be quite as fresh. The oak won't be as apparent. With our wines, once you get to that 5 to 7 year time frame, give or take, based on the vintage, that's when we start to get some of these savory components that come, and it's not just about the fruit and the oak. And so Parabol, the riper wine that we do, we recommend younger drinking for that one, because it is a wine that's much more styled around the ripeness of the fruit and the oak, and those do dissipate over time.
So we have a couple little comments here I just want to jump in on. Sonia says it's so good. Cheers, Sonia. Thank you. It is good. The 2019 vintage it's going to be a great one, I think, across the board. Someone's asking about virtual tasting room attendees today. So we expected about 170 people. We'll see. Not everybody always shows up right promptly at the beginning.
I know we have more than one multi-person shindig going down, where people are hanging out in their own bubbles, sharing bottles. So.
Which is great. Christina, sampling, tasting great. Thank you. So we have a question about what makes a wine vegetarian or vegan. Would you like to field that one?
Yeah, so with wine, any of the additives that you use that would be derived from animal products would be used on a wine, then it would be generally accepted as not suitable for vegan or vegetarian. We are the winery that got the statement, this wine is suitable for vegan and vegetarian, allowable on wine labels. That was a little over 10 years ago. And so we just don't add anything. We're not using substitutes. It's just sulfur. Once in a while, we will use a little tartaric acid if needed, through tweaks in the vineyard, and with different protocols in the cellar, we've been able to mostly get away from that. But given the vintage, we will do that if necessary as well. The general category of products that are not suitable for vegans or vegetarians would primarily be fining agents, but there are some yeast nutrients and other additives that are derived from eggs or fish or milk products that are used in the process of winemaking.
So we just believe in not adding stuff to the wines. If you can make a, more natural wine without additions and manipulations, that is what we are always trying for, which is part of the reason why we only use our own estate grown fruit. And the winery is on site. So the fruit travels 30 seconds, a minute to get here. Joe is on the crush pad processing as it comes in early in the morning. So there's no travel, there's no lag time. It is as fresh as it can get. And I just wanted to show, so your little mini bottles, if you turn them around, because these are real labels, you actually see ingredients listed on the back label. And suitable for vegetarians and vegans. So we have been putting full disclosure on our labels for nearly a decade, including ingredients. This is just about as minimal as it gets. It is grapes, minimal effective sulfur. So a dash of sulfur will give you, a decade age worthiness in the cellar. We wanted these to age. They are, in some countries we consider natural wine, depends upon, your philosophy and where you are and who you ask. But tiny bit of sulfur.
We don't use any sulfur at the crush pad. There's no sulfur used when the wines are alcoholic or malolactic fermenting. So what that means is that the wines get a pinch of sulfur typically after the new year. So we're talking about January, February, March, April into the following year. There's typically one other adjustment when we're doing racking or at blending, and then we will take a look at it at bottling. These wines were looked at and will not need any additional adjustments. So when you use sulfur later in the process and not completely through, a little bit goes a really long ways. On to the 25.
Christine, you're already to number 2. We're right behind you. Yes, so let's move on to the Clone 05, and then I have a question about color. So let's get a sample. Wine number 2, 2019 Clone 05. So what do you want to start with, why we call this the Clone 05 and what that means?
Certainly. So within the estate vineyard here, our largest block is of Pomard, and we planted it on 2 different rootstocks. I'm typically doing 2 harvests at least from each of these blocks. So part of why we're able to make a single clonal wine is that I typically have at least 3 fermentations of this wine to play with. If we were to just harvest 1 clone on 1 day out of 1 fermenter, typically those wines can be a little bit one-dimensional, meaning they may have a good nose, or they may have a good mouth, or they may have a good finish, but rarely would it be the case that they would have all 3. So within the entire vineyard, we've got 4 clones. We're usually doing between 6 and 12 different blocks of fermentations, and then there's alterations there within the whole cluster percentage. So upwards of 20 different blocks that we're looking at and evaluating when we're getting ready to blend. The clone itself, it's a larger berry, kind of thinner skin clone, so it takes a little bit better to new oak. In this particular vintage, it was 50% new oak, 50% 3-year and older. So this one has a good bit more new oak. We also harvest it later than the majority of what we tasted into the Charles. So the Clone 05 for us is picked between 2 and 4 days later. That typically equates to roughly 0.5% alcohol higher. Being that it's a larger berry and a little bit of a thinner skin, I just feel that its ripeness is just a little touch more than some of the other Dijon clones that we use here on the property.
So there's a question about the color, that these are particularly, they're lighter in color, and is that typical for this stage of the process?
It's just typical for our wines and wines that are not manipulated with things to extract more color out of them. If you're familiar with our wines, rarely can you not see through them. In places where winemaking is a little more restrictive, i.e. Burgundy, you generally are not finding wines that you can't see through. Pinot and not being able to see through to something that comes from more New World techniques in the winemaking. We are not concerned about pigment. There's not a whole, there's not much we do at all really to adjust the pigment. Part of it's just the vintage. So berry size and skin thickness so all the pigments are coming from the skin. In a year where there's typically more heat, the skins will get a little thicker, we'll have more color. In cooler years, the skins will be a little thinner, we'll have a little less color, but also it's a function of ripeness and, no less than a dozen winemaking techniques to extract more color in Pinot Noir. But Pinot only has 3 pigments in its skin. All other big reds have 5. And then you have the gray varietals, Pinot Gris, that have 1. And then you have grapes that don't have any pigment, Chardonnay, Semillon, or Sauvignon Blanc.
There we go. So do you add yeast?
No, Mother Nature does that for us. And virtually all wines made, previous to the last 60 years were all, natively fermented. So we don't add any yeast. The building was brand new. We live on site. The vineyard's on site. The cellar's on site. We've never had any inoculated strains. And on top of that, because we do get this question a lot, we have done multiple year DNA analysis to prove that the yeast that we have is specific to us. And it is a strain that is reoccurring, year after year. So we've done that analysis through scorpion testing, through PCR, a very similar test people are using to do the coronavirus to prove that what we have is specific to this place and does not match anything genetically that's in the current database of in excess of 200 strains of known yeasts that are commercially available.
Okay, one more question. Did you have to do anything special, permitting, et cetera, to be able to ship the barrel samples? That is a multiple part answer, but I will say we are lucky. The rules have been loosened up a bit for coronavirus, COVID times. So these are fully labeled little bottles, which is why we're able to ship them out of state. If they were just barrel samples, then there's a thing where you have to charge for the Zoom and the samples. It's a complicated answer, but actually the California ABC and the TTB has worked with us to really kind of loosen things so we can do tastings like this, because
we actually chose an already accepted format for this, because when we concocted this equation, I needed something that was going to keep the wine as safe as possible to get it to you guys as fresh as possible. And so this format with the thicker glass and with the crown cap that seals all oxygen off, unlike a cork, that allows the wine to breathe. These barrels that we're tasting with, they let the wine breathe. Stainless tanks do not. And so that's why corks and barrels and crown caps and stainless steel are similar devices. The wine doesn't breathe. So, but this 187 size is already generally accepted. And so it did make that process easier. And we were hoping to maybe do something a little more broad within our whole appellation for this around these bottles. But, you know, we'll keep pushing and see how it goes.
So this is like those tiny little champagne bottles you get. These are splits, right? So like if you're, you know, in a hotel room somewhere and you want to drink some, you know, cheap bubbles, they come in this size. That's basically what it is.
We also got a bottle of wine one day, and I just started pouring samples. And trust me, when I put 50 mils in the little sample bottle we sent to the lab for the testing, we both put it in a glass and looked at it and thought it was a little on the anemic side. So as we went through some of those, the scale just didn't make sense. We love drinking our wine out of these larger Burgundy stems. And so hope you guys are enjoying the nice, healthy 2.5 ounce pours for 2 people here.
So one more question before we move on. Since you don't filter or fine, do you ever see problems with unwanted bacteria or yeast? If so, how do you address them?
So we have not. We use ozone to sterilize the winery, and starting with a brand new clean winery helps. You know, we didn't inherit any issues someone else. We also, nobody else makes wine in the cellar on this property than us. We're also right here in downtown Boonville, or Sobo as they call it. So we don't have any working wineries within a, you know, 2+ mile radius of where we're at. So cross-contamination because there's somebody next door or, you know, across the driveway is not a factor either. That same testing that we do on the wines, not only for, you know, glyphosate residue and these other things, we're able to actually test the wines for microbiological spoilage organisms. And so these wines are tested 3 different times throughout the vintage. Everything's clean. It's not an issue that we have to worry about. Now, in the old world, you would have had to taste the problem first to know there was one. Nowadays, we can use that same PCR analysis to literally measure the amount of cells per milliliter. And typically, we just don't even have presence of them at all. So,
Knock on wood.
Yeah, a lot of wines to show for it. We're good. Not worried.
We use very old world winemaking, but we do use, you know, science when it's appropriate. And of course we test, you know, everything, alcohol, acidity, our sugars in the grapes when we're harvesting, and running full panels like this to make sure that every bottle of unfined, unfiltered wine that we do is completely, you know, safe when it gets to our customers.
You know, standard winemaking would be to sterilize the grapes with sulfur when they arrive to the winery. And when I say sterilize, I mean remove all the native yeast and bacteria so that you can introduce that one strain that you've selected for the desirable characters that you would like to have on that wine. In my thought process, and those who think like us, that makes a wine more susceptible to spoilage. We would rather not use any sulfur at the crush pad and just embrace the microbial fight between the beneficial organisms and the non-beneficial organisms. So, you know, basically once a wine gets up to a few % alcohol, most everything will die off anyways. But by keeping the grapes healthy, by picking early, having, you know, lower alcohols, we do all bird netting in the vineyard, so there's no bird damage. You know, it's pre-sorted the day before harvest, then sorted in the vineyard, then sorted here beforehand, brought in the winery. So, you know, from the time the first cluster goes into the bin in the vineyard and it's in the cellar with the door closed back here, you know, we're talking an hour or 2. I mean, the grapes are not traveling large distances, getting beat up, getting broken. If any of you have been to Anderson Valley, just imagine what 1,000 pounds of avocados in a 4x4 tub would look like going up and down these roads. And so we just like to get the grapes right out of the vineyard, cold in the morning, directly on the tractor, very intact, very sorted, very clean. And then we just don't end up with any issues down the road.
All right. So the clone, I'll talk a little bit about the clone and just what we kind of see in it, how we think this is going to evolve over time. So Pommard clone for me, all of our palates are different. I always get more kind of juicy red fruits in our Pommard. This does have more new oak and it's a little riper. So this is always a style we've settled on when we just pick from that one block and it's hung on the vine a little longer. It is riper slightly. I think this one clocks in at 13.9%. So you definitely get a little more oak. You get a little more of that ripe fruit in this particular wine. Anything you would like to add to flavors or?
Yeah, I mean, the 2 to 4 days longer that we ripen it pushes the sugars up just a little, but it also softens the acidity. So this is a wine that that we don't wait 20 months to release. We're typically releasing it the following May. So for anybody picking up futures of this or wanting to come in the tasting room if we ever do that again, this wine would be released the following May. Wines that are a little bit riper are not quite as ageable. So that's sort of the trade-off, is that they're more approachable in their youth, but they're not able to lay down quite as long in the cellar.
Great comment from Brian. Yes, they are perfect to drink right out of the bottle. It's kind of a single serving. You could put a straw in there if you want to class it up. Just kidding. I didn't say that.
Not a plastic one.
All right. So ask questions, you guys, if you have them. You've been great about it. I don't know, you know, we're probably not going to go all the way to 5 p.m., but if anybody wants to stay after and talk about any of the wines, anything you want to ask us, we certainly are here after we wrap the official barrel tasting. So I just wanted to throw that out. We are available. And we wanted to touch a little bit, about barrels. Do you want to talk about barrels now? And then after we talk about barrels, we will have a little break and a little bit of music, and we'll talk a little bit more about harvest and do our final wines and more Q&A. So we have, oh, can you recap them for later? If you have a machine?
Yeah, if you make home beer and you have a crown capper, for sure. If you've got a silicone stopper or any of those vacuum sealers or anything like that, these wines will hold for at least a couple days in the refrigerator. And then I would just pull them back out half an hour before you would want to reconsume them.
All right, so I'm going to share our screen now and show you a little map. So we source barrels from different areas in France, and I thought this was just kind of interesting. Joe actually brought this up the other day and said, we need to show this. So bear with us here. Hopefully you can see this photo of the oak forests of France.
So we get a lot of questions about oak in the winery, and especially during barrel tasting day. One of the awesome things about our winery is our tasting room's on the other side of the wall, just on the other side of the camera there, for those of us that have visited. So I purchased barrels from one particular cooperage. Cooperage is the House Ramond. Just yesterday, as a matter of fact, we received our delivery for the 2020 vintage. All these barrels you see back behind me have the different numbers. The first two numbers are the vintage that we have them. So we've got some older ones here. The ones with no numbers up here in this corner back here, those are the ones that just got delivered. So we buy barrels from the Allier, the Bertrange, and the Trancé forests, which are just west of Burgundy, where Pinot is grown in France. Those are the three forests that we prefer to use. Just as you can have single vineyard wines versus appellation-wide wines, you can have single forested wood, which is what we use. Our primary toast is medium toast long. Barrel toasting, honestly, is not a whole lot different than your toaster oven at your house. Maybe you got 4 different settings. I prefer medium toast long. It's just it's a toast that our cooper does. That's a lower temperature for a longer time frame. The last wine we'll try, the Parabol, that one's done in a heavier toast. So maybe a 3.5 to 4 on your toaster oven, where the rest of our wines would be more like a 2 to 2.5. And so just wanted to give you guys a sense of where barrels come from in France. One of the neat things about them is that they are produced by families that have done this for generations. You know, there's no aisle in the Home Depot or Lowe's aisle for cooperage tools. You're born into these families. There's no class in UC Davis or Fresno State or Sonoma State or anywhere else we can go learn how to make barrels. It's a magical art with no glues, no adhesives. The grain thickness changes, the way they toast it changes. And then over time, we just fine tune that like a great chef would do with salt for their different cuisine and of course their personal flavor profile.
So you can see for us, there are additional forests that people use, but we've got our Allier here, our Trancé here, and the Bertrange here. And within our family, honestly, we have different favorites. It's amazing how different, the barrels do, what the impact they have on the final wines. My father, our grape grower, he's a big Bertrange guy. That's his jam.
That's the majority of what we use. More than half of the barrels we get are from Bear Truck.
So we actually just got our barrel delivery yesterday.
Mhm.
Yesterday. So that's right. Sorry, Joe. Joe didn't mention that. So behind us, there are some shrink wrapped ones that are hidden. Okay. So any barrel questions out there? Are we just boring you guys with barrel information? Oh, American oak. There we go. Do you use American oak as well?
We do not. American oak is not treated the same way. Typically, all the barrels that we use are 3 or air dried. I believe there's some new Silver Oak Winery bought a cooperage. I think they're producing some barrels like that now. But as of yet, most American oak is actually dried in a kiln because the majority of it goes into beer or whiskey, distilled spirits, that kind of stuff. So it's a lot less expensive, but they're actually drying it in a kiln and then toasting it over infrared as opposed to 3 or air drying, where our wood is dried in staves for 3 years before the barrels are produced, and then it's toasted over a fire made from the scraps of that wood.
So the staves are like the planks they cut before they form the barrels. They actually put them out and air dry them.
American oak is considered allergic to Pinot Noir. I'm not familiar with anybody that does it on Pinot. We do have a producer here who's, a couple of our neighbors door down that makes bigger red Syrah and Cabernet that uses American oak. And it's known to have a dill pickle character in those wines. So it does stand out a lot, but typically is done with bigger, richer wines, not something that's used as much on Pinot Noir or at all that I'm aware of or have ever come across.
So what do you do with the old barrels that you aren't using anymore?
Well, in the early years, we just made more wine every year. As a husband and wife and one employee on and off, ramping up at harvest and going down. It's not been as much of a problem. We've also had the privilege of multiple friends that have started up their own wineries. When you're a new winery starting out, it's really difficult to get older barrels. It's really easy to get new ones, but you really don't want to maybe have your first vintage be 100% new oak. So
Be a bit oaky.
We have sold also to our neighbor 2 barbed wire fences to the south here, the Anderson Valley Brewing Company. We have sold barrels to them. They actually store more barrels in Anderson Valley than any of the wineries combined. They do a lot of barrel aging on their beer. And so we have sold, or maybe dare I say traded, older barrels. We also make dog beds. We give them away for auction items to wine club members, typically with wine for shelters and things like that. They also work really good for smoking chips. If you're into the smoking chip thing, you can cut the barrels down really small and soak them in some, some lower grade regular table wine or something you forgot about over a weekend or left over from a party. And those smoking chips they do real well. They burn fireplaces too, so campfires, all that good stuff.
True. Okay, how long do you use your barrels before replacing them?
Typically for wineries, if you're 30% new oak, it would be 1/3 new oak, 1/3 second, 1/3 older. We make a whole specific wine that has no new oak. Barrels can last lifetimes if they are kept hydrated and healthy without spoilage organisms. But typically people fall into ruts around the math. If you use 50% new oak, 50% new, 50% second year would be kind of the most standard. I believe the oldest, I don't have any barrels from 06. I still have 1 barrel in here from 07. I don't think I have any barrels from 08. That was the smoky vintage, and there was just no chance on risking that the first year that soaked in had more smoke. Anyways, totally different topic. I have multiple barrels from 09. And so, yeah, as long as they're kept full and hydrated, once you use a barrel, if it stays dry for a year, it's really hard to recover it. But as long as you just keep them empty for that month while you're fermenting the wines or in between bottling and harvest, we just keep reusing them over and over. Some do leak, once in a while you get an earthquake or a forklift accident. We had our first wood-boring beetle. I lost a barrel to wood-boring beetles the first time just this last week. So, there's things that happen to them.
So there's a question also about the map. What were the purple areas on the map? And is it best to get barrels from the areas closest to where the varietals grow? You want me to pop the map back up?
Sure.
All right. Bear with me, people.
Oh, sorry, I didn't. I jumped over that. The purple areas are all the grape growing regions of France. So the brown areas are where the wood comes from. They would not be growing the wood in the same place where the grapes are grown. So to the north, I have to lean in a little here. You know, you've got Champagne, then you've got Alsace there off to the right. Down at the bottom on the left, you've got Bordeaux and then Burgundy there. So central of France is typically maybe like the larger name for that whole area where they grow, except for Vosges or however you pronounce that, is not considered in that area. I think we just, from an American oak standpoint, so many of the trees were harvested. It's up to 3 different strains of trees that we just don't have. American oak comes from the Appalachian Mountains. It's not the California oak, or it's not oak that's local to us. But that's also why, historically speaking, new oak wasn't used in the format that we're familiar with. I mean, this is a very recent phenomenon to use new oak at all. Part of the reason we make the zero new oak bottling is an homage to past winemaking. You know, yeast and filtration and temperature control and new oak, these are all things that have very recently, you know, been adapted to winemaking, you know, 50 to 60 years ago. Previous to that, new oak was not nearly as common, where at least, you know, maybe at this point, I only know of 6 people that make a Pinot with no new oak in the state of California on a regular kind of commercial scale and by purpose. And so for us, that's a specific marketing component as well.
So I'm going through the questions, so bear with me. I want to make sure we answer as many as we can. So the barrels that we just received, the new ones that we both mentioned, it's a big deal to get a barrel delivery. Those will be used on this upcoming harvest. So their first use will be for vintage 2020.
Correct. Yeah. So we'll number them just like these ones back here. I don't know if you guys can see the number 18 and the number 16 here. So that would be the first year. So that'll be 20-1 or 20-2. And you'll see part of that barrel marking process on our little video interlude we have after our music.
Good. Lots of barrel questions. Yes.
That's what we're here for.
Can you buy a barrel as a member? Let's talk. Email me.
The government wouldn't allow it. And to be honest with you, that would be like tasting shredded cheese and saying, oh, that's the best taco I've ever had. Before all these blends are made and they're assembled, that's a little one-dimensional. Right now, we couldn't sell it because it won't have a label on it. This is also 25 cases, so you're probably going to have to be rocking that Amex Black or really solid checkbook.
Well, it's also can we buy a used barrel for a garden planter? So again, after harvest,
definitely.
When we're getting rid of the barrel, the old stuff, if there is anything to get rid of, we're happy to help with anything that our members
the local
need.
farm supply has them available in whole and half sizes as well.
Are the French barrel makers selective in who they sell to, like great wineries like Foursight? Oh, thanks, Jim.
Indeed, we're also limited to the percentage of Bertrange that we're allowed to buy. Luckily, we bought long enough from them that we're able to get more than what the standard is because we like it and love it so much. I also respect them as a cooperage because they refuse to sell any winery 100% new oak. They don't think that showcases their barrel the best. Their main competitive barrel maker in France, many producers who do 100% new oak on Pinot around the globe use that particular producer. And for me, those barrels are just a little aggressive.
I have a question about getting a dog bed. If we have any luck, email me. info@foursightwines.com. So I'm going to go off topic a little bit. And perhaps this is better addressed when we do the parable. Hillary is wondering why we would age the first wine the longest, even though the parable sees the most oak. Do you want to tackle that during the parable, or?
Yeah, so we can touch on it now. It's
okay.
Easy-ish. Parabol's riper, and so that's the main feature about why Parabol's not as ageable is because it's riper. And so when we say riper, what I mean is that the sugars are higher and the acids are lower. So it doesn't have that same natural acidity to hold out. The flavor profile of Parabol is also, we'll talk about that shortly when we taste it, meant to be consumed a little younger. The more new oak you use, actually the more oxygen that gets diffused in the wine. So new barrels actually breathe more than older barrels. Older barrels that have had multiple years of wine and tartrate crystals soaked into them, they don't lose as much wine through the pores. So the pores of the wood actually allow water and alcohol to evaporate and oxygen goes back in. The new barrels, well, especially when they're brand new, they will soak up a lot of wine to begin with, and they will breathe as much as 4 times as much. So every 3 weeks, we have to come take this top off, add more wine to the barrels so that the wines, when they're in barrel, don't over oxygenate and become not good. So every 3 weeks we add more wine, and in the newer barrels, you have to add a lot more wine. So we measure dissolved oxygen, and Parabol has a lot more of it than the Zero, which has the least because there's no new oak use there. We also don't pump the wine. Everything's moved by gravity or by inert gas. And so we're not introducing oxygen in any other way, shape, or form to the wines either, allowing us to use less sulfur.
Would you ever do a single cooperage release?
Everything we do is a single cooperage release. So yes.
One barrel maker makes all of our barrels. They just happen to come from Three Forests.
It's sort of the norm in Burgundy to use one particular barrel producer for whatever reason. That's what a lot of them have fallen into. But a lot of those relationships are, you know, friends and family and neighbors and marriages and all that kind of stuff. So we prefer to hone our wines in with one cooperage house, but then using different forests, different toasts, you know, doing the tweaks within that. But Ramon is our cooper for life at this point.
Christina says, in case anyone is curious, a wine barrel fits in the backseat of a Prius. It's good to know. I did not know that. I don't know. Can it haul a full one though? Okay. Do we buy any barrels from Champagne?
We do not. Typically, wood that's used in Champagne would not be referred to as a barrel. It would be referred to as a cuve. So standard there would be more the larger ovals. That would also be, other than stainless, the majority of what you would see in other areas like Alsace as well. Those high acid white wines are often done in the larger oak rounds.
Okay, an empty barrel fits in the backseat of a Prius. Good to know. Okay, I think we got a couple questions about the Parabol and aging, etc. So I think what we're going to do is take a little break, guys, and have a little music. If you need to stretch your legs or, you know, pop a full-size bottle, we're going to be here for a little bit longer. You're welcome to do that. We have on with us Steve Winkle, who is a musician from Ukiah, which is just inland Mendocino County. And Steve's awesome. He plays for our events, and now he's virtual like us. So we're gonna. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Christy. Thank you.
Can't see you quite yet, but I can hear you. There. So we're gonna let him serenade us for a few songs and take a little pause, and then we'll come back. We'll taste some Parabol. We'll talk about Parabol and of course those questions and some other interesting and hopefully
Keep
not
the questions
too,
coming. We'll get to them as best we can at some point.
hopefully not too geeky stuff. We do like to talk Pinot. So.
Cool. Let me see if I can hit my video here. I'm still got the video disabled, Christy.
Okay. Thank you for bearing with us, guys. It's our first webinar here, so here we go.
Do you have to make him the host for a second? Or no, he'll have to do that back. Don't. You have to make him a host for a second.
Okay. You might have to share your screen, Steve. We did practice, guys, I promise. We did a full run through.
Sure. Okay. I'm still getting host is still disabled the video.
Pink
Okay.
preview. Just
You are the host now. Now you're in trouble.
Now take it away.
Okay, here we go. All right. Well, thank you, Christy.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
Particularly want to thank you for making me learn new things. Hello, everyone. How about a little, start with a little Lynyrd Skynyrd light. How about that one? Well, I was cutting the rug at a place called The Jug with a gal named Linda Lou. When in walked a man, got a gun in his hand, and he was looking for you know. He said, now hey there, fella with your hair colored yellow, what you trying to do? See, that's my woman there, and I'm a man who cares. It might just be the end of you. That's not okay. When I was scared and fearing for my life, shaking like a leaf on a tree, 'cause she was leaning mean and big and bad and pointing like a gun at me. I said, no, hey there, mister, I didn't even kiss her. Don't want no trouble with you. And I know you don't know me, and you sure don't know me, but I'd ask one favor of you. Oh, won't you give me 3 steps, give me 3 steps, mister, just 3 steps toward the door. Give me 3 steps, give me 3 steps, mister, and you won't see me no more. With a cloud turned away, I began to pray. Water fell right on the floor. See, I'm telling you, son, that it ain't no fun staring down that 44. Then he turned to scream at Linda Lou, the break I was looking for. And you could hear me cry about a mile away as it tumbled out that door. Well, won't you give me 3 steps, give me 3 steps, mister, just 3 steps towards the door. Give me 3 steps, give me 3 steps, mister, and you won't see me no more. Won't you give me 3 steps, give me 3 steps, mister, just 3 steps towards the door. Give me 3 steps, give me 3 steps, mister, and you won't see me no more. That's the truth. All right. Now the new CDC guidelines say we need to change that song to give me 6 feet and wear a mask. I don't know. I don't know if that's funny or not, really. But... All right. Here's an old favorite from Stevie Wonder. No New Year's Day to celebrate, no chocolate covered hearts to give away, no first of spring, no song to sing. In fact, it's just an ordinary No wedding Saturdays in the month of June. But what it is something true. Made up of these three words I must say to you. Well, I just called to say I love you. I just called to say how much I care. Yeah, I just called to say that I love you. I mean it from the bottom of my heart. No summer high, no warm July, no harvest moon to light a tender August night. No autumn breeze, no falling leaves. The birds to fly. No Libra sun, no Halloween, no giving thanks for all the Christmas the joys will bring. But what it is, so old, so new, are just these three words that I will say to you. Yeah, I just called to say I love you. Yeah, I just called to say how much I care. Yeah, I just called to say I love you. And I mean it from the bottom of my heart. Well, I just called to say I love you. I just called to say how much I care. Yeah, I care. I just called to say I love you. And I mean it from the bottom of my heart. Of my heart. All right, just call. I think I got time for one more, I hope. It's a bit of a jig, hoping maybe you'll get up and bounce around a little bit. This was originally done by Rod Stewart and Faces. Ooh la la. Oh, granddad, well, I laughed at all of your words. I thought you were a bitter man, 'cause you spoke of women's ways. You say the trap you and they'll use you before you even know. But love is blind if you're far too kind. Don't ever let it show. And I wish that I knew what I know now. When I was younger, I wish that I knew what I know now. When I was stronger. Well, the can-can's such a pretty dance, it'll take your heart away. But backstage, back on earth again, see the dressing rooms are gray. Well, they'll come on strong, it won't be long before they make you feel a man. But love is blind and you are too kind, don't, you're just a boy again. And I wish that I knew what I know now. When I was young, I wish that I knew what I know now. When I was stronger. Ooh la la. Well, you want a kiss, you get a cheek, if you're twinkling in the star. Then you want some more, and she's fast asleep, and you know just where you are. Oh, young grandson, nothing I can say. Well, you have to learn it all yourself, yeah. It's the hardest way, but I wish that I knew what I know now. When I was younger, I wish that I knew what I know now. When I was stronger, I wish that I knew what I know now. When I was younger, I wish that I knew what I know now. When I was stronger. Ooh la la, ooh la la, la la, ooh la la, ooh la la, la la, yeah. Yes, I wish that I knew what I know now. Ooh la la.
Thank you, Steve.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you, Christy, Joe. I want to shout out to Bill and Nancy and the whole group. Thank
We're
you so much for
clapping.
having me.
We have to see it.
Yeah, we're clapping.
We must learn new things. Everyone stay safe, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see you at our next virtual.
That'd be awesome. Thanks.
All right. You might have to stop all of your video and audio. All right, well, we're managing that. We are going to go ahead and get some wine in the glasses if you haven't already. So let's get some Parabol in our glass, and then we'll talk a little bit about the Parabol and answer everybody's questions that have come in the meantime. So if you don't mind, I'm going to step aside so Joe can get in here and give us some Parabol in our glass. That's the orange label.
So Parabol is actually a wine that's new to the portfolio. It's not been with us the entire time. All the other wines we've we've made for the entire time that we've made them. Parabol is the reserve blend that Launder Vineyards used to make. I used to be the general manager at Launder Vineyards, who had a tasting room just a quarter mile up the road here from us here in Boonville. When they retired out of the industry about 7.5 years ago, and I got to follow my dream to come here and work full time, we decided to purchase the trademark Parabol. So the Launder style was a bigger, richer, above 14 alcohol, higher percent new oak with heavier toast barrel style. And I felt that to help honor all the work that the Launders did for Anderson Valley as an appellation and the accolades they received for their wines, that this wine should continue to live on. So I produced this wine basically to the style of Larry Launder's palate, which is a bigger, richer, riper expression of Pinot Noir. He used to always tease me that making ageable Pinot was a young man's game. And they retired out here and made phenomenal wines for 12 years and then relocated. This wine is picked up to 2 weeks later, anywhere between 10 and 14 days, depending on the vintage. The alcohol is typically up to a point higher than the Zero and the Charles. This is right at sort of my ethical limit of winemaking. I refuse to do water or nitrogen additions, and much over this level of ripeness that we're able to achieve, you would need to be getting into dealing with soaking up raisins with some water additions and some nitrogen for the lack of nutrients that the grapes would have at that time. The offset in the vineyard and how we treat this wine different is I never exactly know which of the blocks are going to be in it. And it just is the blocks that look the healthiest, that have the least ripe fruit, that look like they're going to be able to hang the longest. If the leaves are already starting to yellow, or you know, some of our sandier blocks where the riverbed would just never be suitable to the Parabol. So it's typically 4 different blocks, 3 that are harvested much later, and typically 1 that comes from the clone that's just that 2 to 4 days later. It's a smaller bottling. It's not something that we've always sent out to the wine club. And my favorite food pairing for this one is the tri-tip, the HGWT marinade tri-tip. For those of you that don't know, I also produce and sell my own barbecue marinade that our local natural food store makes. And when you put a tri-tip and 4 days of marinade on that and pull it off the Weber grill, it's a match made to heaven to Parabol. This heavier toast oak really gives this wine a deeper, darker, kind of more on the profile of chocolate coffee toffee flavor profile than any of our other wines. And then the fruit's just a lot richer and riper as well. Being that we're harvesting it later, basically the fruit spectrum of Pinot Noir begins with acidity that scorches your palate. Then you get into kind of sparkling wine flavors that are very, very light. And then my favorite category comes very shortly after that, which is the rhubarb, pomegranate, cranberry flavor profile. When we go 2-4 more days in the Clone 05, we often get more of those redder fruits, the cherries, the blackberries. When we're into Parabol, we're into blackberries and plums, and really just big, dark, really intense red fruits. You don't want to age this one quite as much. It gets more oxygen from the more new oak. And if you like the flavor profile of the big fruit and the big oak, this is only going to dissipate over time. So we recommend drinking the Parabol basically up to 5 to 7 years from the vintage date. So it's even less ageable in our opinion than the white wines that we produce. However, you know, we still have Parabol in our cellar going way, way back.
I will admit, many of you have heard me say this before in the tasting room, but when I have had a hard mommy day, a glass of Parabol when I get home, this is what I do. So it can take food, but it also can just be something, because it is a little softer just to drink and enjoy and have a glass, after a long day.
The other thing I love about Parabol is we use it for Pinot Noir conversion therapy, which means that if you have friends or you're in mixed company and you're not sure, maybe they drink red wine, but that doesn't necessarily mean Pinot Noir. This would be a Pinot that you could try and bring somebody over that maybe is a Zin or Merlot or Syrah drinker, because it's a richer style of Pinot, so it's a little bit of an easier transition. My father-in-law also loves to use it for like cocktail hour kind of mixed company Pinot because it is smooth.
So I have a couple questions about the Parabol. So does any Parabol fruit come from the prior Launder vineyard? Second part of the question, what clones are blended for Parabol?
The first question is no, and it never did. The Launder Vineyard was planted in 2001, the same year that our vineyard was planted, and so did not bear any fruit until '04. Parabol started in 2001. The Launder fruit was a little too thicker skin. Most of it was Swan clone Pinot Noir. However, the clones for Parabol have never been disclosed. Fun fact, in my personal cellar at home, I have a wooden sign that was given to us by a longtime distributor of Launder wines that says Parabol Vineyard, because it was a wine that people assumed was a single vineyard wine because it was the most expensive of the portfolio. And basically it was a winemaker's blend or a barrel select, but instead of using those marketing terms, creating its own kind of flavor profile around the brand of Larry Launder's palate.
So when we started making this wine, I mean, we really saw this as an opportunity to expand our style. We made the 3 Pinots and then the kind of fun one-off things that we do. But to make kind of a bolder version of our vineyard was a fun challenge for us, and it was also the drought. So it was the perfect time to hang something and to start that project where we basically had endless hang time from the vineyard to ripen this.
The first bottle of Pinot Noir my father-in-law had was 2003 Launder Parabol at the 2005 Anderson Valley Pinot Noir Festival. So it was just a unique thing that we wanted to preserve. But definitely the style is, it's a lot riper. When I first started at Launder Vineyards in 2007, they had never produced a Pinot under 15% alcohol. So that wasn't something that was going to happen under my oversight. And so we brought that in just a little, but.
So Tom says he's having tri-tip tonight. I'm going to give you a virtual cheers here. Well done.
So are we.
So have you seen the Parabol change over the years that you have made it? And if so, what is different year to year?
So the Parabol is a stylized wine that is not, to be completely honest with you, we don't put the vineyard on it, and you could take the vintage off too. It's a stylized wine. When you're ripening much over 14% alcohol, in our opinion, you're past clone, you're past vineyard. That level of ripeness, and especially once you get even just one more touch and you're talking about all the additions of water and nitrogen and yeast, then in our opinion, you've just completely lost, sort of sense of place. So this higher ripened style is easier to do, except in very, very cold vintages, because we're ripening past the state at which, in our opinion, the vintage or the vineyard or the clone matters as much. This is a stylized wine. If you were to come here and I poured you all the ones I have in the cellar going all the way back, only the age will let you know it's not meant to be as different as the other wines that we produce. to
add, I definitely think that the Parabol does change, with the vintage, as do all our wines. We're 100% estate grown wines. So what our fruit is that year, is what will come through in the final wines. Because we do so little to the wines when they come here. So, even the yeast populations change depending upon if it's a cold year or a warm year. So there will be vintage variations from year to year. I mean, obviously you can always tell the Parabol is a Parabol year to year because it is the ripest and it has that signature oak as compared to the other wines that we produce. But there will be changes just, for the seasons, like anything else that, you might farm or garden.
One of my favorite things about Parabol is allowing us to produce a lot of different wines. Many Pinot houses only make the lean and mean style or only the big and rich style. And we're able to cover more gamuts. I only have one vineyard to work with, so we have to get creative to creating different types of wines out of just the one vineyard. So we play with clones, we play with oak regimens, and that's always going to be part of the program moving forward.
So I'm going to back up just a little bit. We had a question about the 2015 vintages of these 3 wines. One of our attendees is opening some 2015. So how does a 2015 vintage compare to the 2019?
Granted, we're in California, for we're spoiled, but 2015 was the last year of the drought. That was not the case in 2019. So 2015 would be classified as a small berry, thick skin vintage. We were in the drought, so the berries were small, and we had a lot of heat, so the skins were thick. The natural defense that grapes have against heat to make sure that the seed is able to produce grapevines is to thicken up the skins. 2019 was an average berry, average skin thickness. So the 15s were a little bit riper. Smaller crops tend to ripen a little bit faster, and there's more color and concentration in those wines. They're also was within Pinot, we were off by over 40%, and the white grapes were off by over 30%. So there aren't much of the 15s. We just didn't have much. Droughts aren't
Off
good
meaning
for
scarce.
production. The vineyard was down dramatically.
So I have a question about the marinade for the tri-tip.
It's on the website.
You can get it through us.
Salt-based marinated, perfect for Pinot Noir. There's recipes. It's called hcwt.life.com or hcwt.life, excuse me.
Karen and Mark, Parabel's our favorite. Cheers to you. It is a lot of our members' favorite, and within the family too. How do you determine the thickness of the skins?
It's not determined per se. I just have a little grid. I like to think about vintage being thin skin, thick skin, or average skin size, and then berry size the same. So we sort of take that into consideration throughout the growing season in regards to how much whole clusters we might use, and then also how much new oak we use. So in 2015, small berry, thick skin, did not use as much oak, did not use as much stems. If we have a vintage that is a thin skin and a big vintage, we hope to use more stems if they're ripe, but typically we're going to be using oak more to build a structure in that particular example. So it's a tactile, it's just a sensation, and then just, you know, you got to do it for 20 years and you get a sense of it. When is your perfect avocado ripe? When is your perfect banana ripe? When is your perfect peach ripe? We all have those different things. For me, a peach has to drip off your elbow. You know, she likes wine older than I do. You know, it's okay to have personal differences too, but when it comes to the cellar, you know, I include the family in all the decisions, but my palate's got to drive it because that's what's attached to me.
Huh. You have to have a thick skin if you're a winemaker. That is true, Tom. Although usually if people don't like your wines, they don't tell you.
Or just tell me why and I'll send you to another winery down the road that maybe has something different for your flavor profile.
Okay. There is a question about the rosé that we teased everyone with.
So we made one back in 2011, and it's not rosé. It's that word's been a little ran through. Pink wine, or you pronounce it better than me. Go ahead.
The Van Gris. So
it's gray wine of Pinot Noir. So it's a whole cluster pressed white wine or pink wine. Gray wine, they call it in France, because some of the color comes through. Light pale salmon, if any of you have been with us since 11, we made one back then too. So we like to make fun things.
So release soon, fall time. We want to make sure
maybe
it's ready.
Thanksgiving, we'll see.
Right, HEWT tri-tip and parabol, perfect match. We agree. Okay, we did have questions. I want to jump back before I get to some of these new stuff about topping wine. So maybe Joe can explain a little bit about how, you know, quick thing about how we top the barrels, where the wine comes from.
Yeah, a couple of questions there about where the wine comes from and what's the idea behind that process. So oxygen is great for wine in really, really small doses, and in large doses, it kills wine. So the vessel needs to be full. Quick little reminder, now that I think about it, all y'all should save these little tiny bottles. And if you have a little rubber stopper or even the back end of a cork will shove down inside there. If you're almost the way through the bottle and you need to save that for another day, the best way would be to transfer that into a smaller vessel. So that wine that we're pouring in is coming basically out of kegs. And so anywhere from 1 gallon glass all the way up to 15.5 gallon beer kegs that you might be familiar with. So we used to do some home brewing back in the day. I have a lot of 5 gallon stainless cylinders. We have 5 gallon glass jugs, 1 gallon glass jugs. So no matter what, you just need to keep your vessel full. So the wine that we use for topping, we keep all the lots different. Inherently, the vineyard never produces exactly 2 barrels of wine from that one block or 4 barrels. So there's always a little bit of extra wine that comes out of the fermenter. And we just save that aside in jugs that are topped, and we open those when we need them. And then we, you know, if I have a 5 gallon jug and I need a gallon to top a batch, well, then the rest of it goes into 4 1 gallon jugs, so on and so forth.
Okay. So question about another vintage comparison, but I do want to, before we jump into something not parabol, talk a little bit about what we get in this wine, how this wine will kind of evolve with age.
So the parabol's got that darker fruit profile. It holds that really solid for 5 to 7 years, and then that starts to fade a little bit. In the extreme example of fading with parabol, it just becomes, just really, really delicate, and the fruit is so big that when that shrinks, it's becomes more like dried. The dried fruits would be more the dried version of those same fruits that you taste in it.
But you still have 5 to 7 years
Yeah.
to enjoy this per our recommendation. So
And
most
that's
people,
still our
this
recommendation.
wine is going to be gone way before 7 years is
Yeah.
up. Well, let's just be honest with each other.
And we have it farther. Again, it's just personal preference. Christy likes wine older than I do. Some believe that winemakers drink more young wine because we taste more young wine than anybody out there. I think Christy likes older wine because she grew out here in the in the wet, damp horses, farm life, just earthy aromas. I still like some fruit in my wines along with earth. Once there's the wine's a little devoid of fruit, then and there's only earth, and I'm not typically as big of a fan. But to each their own.
I like a little dirt. So comparing this vintage to 2014. So Larry, I think you're the winner for the food pairing. He said he just had the 2014 Charles picnicking with single thread takeout duck dinner. That is an amazing dinner right now. So how would you compare 2014 to 2019?
2014 was in the drought, but it was an absolutely phenomenal vintage for us. One of the benefits of the drought is the stems being riper. And so we were able to include the most amount of stems we've ever done in the 2014 at 50% whole cluster inclusion. Those are the most ageable wines we've ever made to date, at least. We'll need another handful of years to double check that with future vintages. But for the most part, going back, I think that vintage has surpassed the 2007. There was a little bit more sediment in that vintage as well. More whole clusters led to a little more just pectin and a little more solids in the wines. I enjoy 14s a lot. They're quite ageable. 19 is close to that, but just 19 is more of an average vintage. 14 was a ripe stem, a little more than average thick, berry size, average skin thickness. So
I'm going to be honest. He asked me to print out this whole berry thickness skin size chart for you guys, and I did veto it.
I show it to people in the tasting room all the time.
For the geekiness factor, perhaps I shouldn't have in hindsight, but he has a whole graph.
And we map the vintages over where they fall into play because we do get these questions a lot. The main difference between 14 and 19 would just be that the 14s have been in bottle for 5 years. So it's imperfect analysis. There's no way I can cryogenically seal the 14 and then let the 19 age perfectly as long and then taste them side by side. They're always going to be siblings of a different vintage.
Okay, 2 people want to see the graph. Hooray for the graph. Do we have a copy of the graph printed out?
No, I don't know. Email us or we'll share it. I don't know.
We can share the graph.
I'll make her put it on Facebook and IG or something tomorrow.
Oh, even better. We can make a YouTube video about the graph.
Okay, we can talk about the graph.
We'll just call it the graph, and you guys will know.
It's also got the 11-point protocols that we use to decide when it's time to harvest grapes. So they're both really fun, geeky sheets that we share in the tasting room.
I know. I forget about the geekiness of all of you lovely customers and club members sometimes. Question about the 2016 Cuvée Aussie. Have you had it recently? Should we hold it?
Cuvée Aussie, thank you for reminding me. Sorry.
I'm going to grab the bottle. I'll be right back.
I need to correct myself. That is the most ageable wine we've ever made because it's produced in a magnum format. And so it's the same size cork. So the same amount of oxygen as you would get in a regular format, but there's twice the amount of wine. So the theory there is that magnums are more ageable because the wine can absorb more oxygen over a longer time frame. Cuvée Aussie is half a barrel of my favorite Charles from that vintage, half a barrel of my favorite Zero barrel from that vintage. Put in a magnum format. We did 12 cases of this one, I believe. And we have had it recently, quite a bit. We've been getting together with her parents over tri-tip and salmon here and there.
Early in isolation, we did a French fry and Cuvée Aussie night. And I know that sounds odd, but it was spectacular. We hadn't had food from not our kitchen in a month and a half. And I have to say, not bad with homemade French fries and like deep fried French fries and ketchup. Was not bad. Okay. We will share the graph, I promise. So a comment that, there's more oak now in the Clone 05 as it's opened. You know, these are baby wines. They have just been shipped. They definitely, you know, will open up with time if they aren't already gone from your mini bottles. Just teasing you all. So we'll kind of wrap the parabol and address a couple more questions. If you guys have anything else, please throw it in. We'll be here. We'll answer whatever we can. So my parting comment on the parabol. I mean, if you taste it, you can taste that ripeness and that oak. And you know, generally, I drink it young. I enjoy it young. That's what it's all about. It's just that, like, I kind of said, like the pleasure scale in wine. You know, we do drink a lot of kind of low alcohol, high acidity wines, but you have to have that pleasure factor. For me, like I need that a little bit of that fruit there to kind of balance out, you know, the acidity and the structure. And this definitely, we're pushing the pleasure scale toward the other end.
As well as with food pairing options, Parabol really opens up a lot of stuff off the grill and different kinds of, you know, ribs or Parabol's the best wine for spicy food if you are going that route as well, other than the whites. Yeah, it's a fun one. Blue cheese. You like it like that.
I do. I just like blue cheese.
None of the rest of our wines work as well.
Okay, an oxygen question on laying bottles down. So I've read that against common thought, storing bottles on their side is not important since the humidity is naturally so high inside the bottle, the cork bottom doesn't need to be soaking in wine. What do you think?
I would say if you had, that is correct. If your cellar maybe is perfectly 70% humidity and 58 degrees all day, every day for the entirety of time. We have had bottles that have been mispacked in a case box or have just been misplaced in certain parts of the personal cellar that were right side up, and you could visibly see the color difference and taste the difference. So the wines are packaged upside down for case box purposes. For us, all of our personal cellar is upside down or on its side. And the only case where I'm familiar with where it's actually true that humidity is high enough inside the bottle is sparkling wine because it's under pressure. So it's still at least, you know, whatever, 2 atmospheres, I think, underneath that cork. So it's just hypersaturated area. But that would not be my recommendation. I don't know. I mean, there's so much hocus pocus in wine and wives' tales. But we have seen corks dry up because they were stood right side up. So
actually, if you go back a little bit in our social media, I should repost this. We did discover in our cellar 2 bottles in our library cellar. One which was not flipped, it was upright, and one which was flipped. And same wine, same length of time until we opened the box and found these. And the color difference just on those 2 wines, they were different colors. We eventually popped them, they tasted differently.
The colors are different because the pigments in white wine turn more orange or brown when they're exposed to oxygen. And so these wines were bottled on the same day on the same bottling line with the same amount of sulfur with the same cork. One was right side up and it turned brown. This would happen if you opened a bottle of white and set it on your counter and just forgot about it for a week or 2. That's what happens. Once the sulfur is eliminated, the wine starts to turn an orangish brown color. So that's why we knew what that was. And I'm not sure if we opened it and tasted it. So much good wine, so little time.
I think I did.
You probably did. No.
Actually, we did a little Q&A. We said, who can guess which one of these was upright and which one of these was upside down? And Sonia, who's here, you got it right. Parabol's great with pizza we just had delivered. I am jealous. Karen and Mark, I'm very jealous. We do not have a delivery in Anderson Valley, California, the big town of Boonville. Parabol's great to drink while camping. Agreed. Campfire, camp chair.
S'mores.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate the comments on the tasting. We are learning all of this as everyone else is, bumbling our way through. We are planning to do some new release virtual tastings in the fall. We're planning to do another wine club party virtually in the fall because of course we're not sure when we'll be able to be in person in that kind of a gathering. Good question, Tom. What's your all-time favorite glass of wine and where were you when you drank it?
It was a full glass and it was with her.
I'm going to go with that answer.
It was 100% a Pinot Noir. I don't know. I don't know if I want to get into Epiphany wine.
Yeah, I think that's a whole different tasting question. That sounds like a great wine club party thing we can all talk about together, what our Epiphany wines were. We've been so spoiled. We've had so many good bottles of wine in our lives. So we've been in the business.
Just to add, it would not be one of ours that we would never say that it was one of ours. The other way to answer that question is, what's the number one most consumed wine in our household? People are always surprised.
Other than Pinot Noir?
Well, I mean, Roeder's mostly Pinot, so it's Pinot and Chardonnay.
Do make a lot of bubbles. I'm not going to lie about that.
It's a great palate cleanser in case you need to do blending, or evaluation things.
Okay. A question about, can you tell us more about Evan's orange wine? Yeah, we made a commercial orange wine this year. We made it for ourselves a couple of times.
Twice for us, and then when I would bring those bottles out at our at-home dinner table, the most animated that my fellow winemakers would be when they would come over for dinner would be about when the orange wine would come out. So when it became the time that Evan was asking about what kind of wine he could make in the vintage, now that whatever that point was, he'd eaten grapes for 2 or 3 years. I asked him what type of wine he wanted to make, and he said orange. And so he had a practice vintage, and then this was his commercial vintage. So this is skin contact fermented Sauvignon Blanc made identically to the Pinot Noirs, 21 days on the skins, 30% partial whole cluster, no sulfotyl malolactic is finished. We made a commercial production of 1 stainless drum, 22 cases, I believe, 21 or 22 cases, something like that. And I don't know, maybe by Thanksgiving on that one too, I don't know, things are tough, but that's one of those wines that's supposed to be as versatile as pink wine is when it comes to Thanksgiving dinner table. So I'm looking forward to actually trying that. The only other food pairing I know of for orange wine is fried chicken. Thanks to Dirty and Rowdy and Hardy Wallace for that recommendation. Not many people out here make in Semillon period or skin contacted white. So we had that conversation more than a couple times.
Yes, Karen and Mark, open another bottle. It is early on the West Coast. We will definitely be celebrating ourselves. So general question about storage. What's the best way to store a partially drank bottle of red?
There's 3 different theories on that. The easiest and kind of most basic would be to exhale inside the bottle and try and get some of that CO2 you exhale to settle on the top of the wine.
Sounds old school.
It's very old school. Put it in the refrigerator. Just take it out beforehand. Just like any other vegetable or any other food item, when it's cold, the oxygen ingress into that will be slower. So when you cut an apple and it starts to brown, cut an avocado and it starts to brown, these are all the oxidative, things happening. The same thing that happens as we mentioned, the wine kind of turns brown or orange color.
They're all preservation. So the 2 preservation kind of things that we use, the Private Preserve, it's a spray can. You can get it on the Wine Enthusiast catalog. It's a mixture of gases that we would use here in the winery. And you can gas that and put the cork back in. And that's great. That's actually the best, I think, better than those, vacuum seal and all the other stuff that you have.
Same commercial gas we use in winemaking, $9 or $10 for a canister that, will last you a year in your house.
And
transferring to a smaller container. If you have smaller containers, if you save the splits or a half bottle, or in some cases on the Wine Enthusiast website, you can get different decanter sets. And the idea is whatever wine you haven't finished, you just want to eliminate the oxygen, from it. Refrigerator works too.
Yeah. At the tasting room, we actually use, it's called the Pungo. It's the commercial version of the Corvin, which I'm sure some people here are using to taste some bottles, some old stuff.
Sterilizable version of the Corvin, should you find a tainted bottle.
Yes.
More importantly,
so,
I got to be a germaphobe. There's no filters here.
We use those in the tasting room, which of course, those are amazing. The Corvin, the Pungo, but they're $400, $500 a piece. So you have to be committed to being able to
Made in America aluminum.
Yeah, partially drank or sampling your older wines. Thanks, Nate and Deanne. Glad to have you join us. Clone 05 is our favorite. Clone's awesome.